the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Bit of a cloudy fall day here in Cooperstown, but we're very glad to be with you. Our virtual program today is our virtual curator spotlight. My name is Bruce Markison. I'm not a curator, but I will be talking to Tom Sheber, our senior curator. We will talk to Tom about a new display that has just opened up really just a few days ago here at the Baseball Hall of Fame. It's called Double Play. It's about two sports stars in baseball and other sports, in some cases, athletes that have starred in 3 or more sports. We'll get into what's featured in this display and some of these great versatile athletes. Before we do that, just want to remind you about an upcoming program this week, Thursday, November the 4th. We will feature our virtual author series. We're going to talk to Steve Treader, longtime baseball historian, and he's written a terrific new book called 40 Years a Giant. It's all about the career and life of Horace Stoneham, longtime owner of the New York and San Francisco Giants, part of one of baseball's royal families, the Stoneham family, multiple generations owning baseball teams. And that'll be coming up Thursday, November 4th at 2 p.m. That program and this one, like all of our other virtual programs, are brought to you by the Ford Motor Company. Programs like this are made possible through the generous support of Ford Motors. So we do appreciate what they do for us. And today, virtual curator spotlight, looking at Double Play, two sports stars. Joining us is our senior curator, Tom Sheber. It's been a while, Tom, since we've talked online. How you been?
I'm okay. How are you, Bruce?
We're doing well. We're doing well here. Always fun to talk about new displays, new exhibits, new artifacts at the Baseball Hall of Fame. In some cases, artifacts that aren't new, but we make discoveries about them, which you did with one of the artifacts in particular that is featured in this exhibit, Double Play, two sports stars. Right off the top, Tom, fans coming to the Hall of Fame, where can they find this particular display case?
They can find it near the end of our exhibit called Whole New Ballgame, which is on the second floor of the museum. And near the end of that, there's a case that's devoted to this subject. So it's part of another exhibit, but this case is its own little, almost a little mini exhibit that has its own themes that do relate to the basic themes of Whole New Ballgame, but we take it in kind of a different direction. We decided to delve into guys who were two sports stars, either on the field or officiating.
I've been using the term display, and I've been doing that on purpose. Is it really a display or is it an exhibit? And what, in curatorial terms, is the difference?
Well, that's a good question. So I think of this as an almost an exhibit within an exhibit. I tend to think of displays as cases that have artifacts in them, but don't necessarily have a storyline or a cohesive story. It's almost like not quite random selection. We could have a selection of artifacts related to a topic, but if you don't really weave that topic together, if you don't try to bring it together, I don't think of it as an exhibit, or perhaps I should be using a longer word, which is an interpretive exhibit. So Whole New Ballgame is an exhibit, and this is a case within that exhibit, but the case itself kind of stands alone as a miniature exhibit about this particular subject.
We've got some headliners we're going to talk about during this program. Michael Jordan, who was just in Cooperstown for our induction. It was a big surprise to a lot of people, including myself. We'll talk about Beau Jackson. You can see his football jersey prominently displayed in the case. We'll talk about Eddie Alvarez, who currently plays for the Marlins and has been an Olympic star in other sports. We will also talk about the great Jim Thorpe, called by some the greatest pure athlete of the 20th century. But we're going to begin with a man who was just in Cooperstown during the induction. He wouldn't talk to me. Of course, he doesn't know me, so that's perfectly acceptable. But he was here. Michael Jordan was one of Derek Jeter's guests. But more to the point in terms of how he ties into this two sports star theme. It was February 1994, just a few months after he'd been playing for the Chicago Bulls. He signs on to play pro baseball, and he ends up using this bat in the minor league teams with a team in the Southern League, Double-A ball, the Birmingham Barons. So here we have the Wilson model bat. Tell us a little bit more about this artifact, and if you know the story about how we got it as well, Tom.
Well, it's a baseball bat that he used with the Birmingham Barons. When he signed in February with the White Sox organization, it wasn't disclosed where he would play minor league ball. And it wasn't until late March, actually, that the announcement was made that he would be with Birmingham, which is Double-A. Not a rookie league, not single-A baseball. It's very competitive. And here's a guy who's in his 30s, early 30s, playing alongside guys who have played baseball their entire life and who are highly touted enough to make it up to Double-A baseball and certainly were great athletes looking to eventually make the majors. So they kind of threw him down the double black diamond route down the ski hill, when he starts off being a pro baseball player. But it's a bat that he used for that the team, and his story in the minor leagues in 1994, and then actually followed it up playing in the Arizona Fall League, where he really did quite well. It was very promising. That's what we're sort of encompassing for this story, and we have this bat from that season in '94.
Tom, do we know the length and the size of the bat in terms of the number of ounces?
Yeah, it's a 34-inch. I can't remember how heavy it is, but it's a 34-inch bat.
Now, I see what appears to be an autograph. Is that a facsimile, or did he actually sign it?
That's an actual signature of Michael Jordan's with a silver Sharpie.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
One thing, I don't remember seeing that many Wilson bats in professional baseball. Maybe it was more popular back in the 1990s, but, we tend to think of Hillerick and Bradsby, Louisville Slugger. Some of the maple bat companies have become very popular in recent years, but Wilson, is that a traditional bat company?
They've made bats for a long time. They're not as common as some of the others that you see, like you're saying, Rawlings or Louisville Slugger. Now, Marucci is a major bat company. Victus, a number of other bats, including Cooperstown Bat Company. And not anyone can have a bat in the majors. So I'm veering off into talking about Major League Baseball, not minor league baseball. But you can't just walk up with any old bat in the majors. In other words, don't try and hone a bat from a tree struck by lightning and think that you can just walk up to the plate and play with that bat. They have to be approved by Major League Baseball, various companies.
Yeah. Now, on the surface, his numbers with Birmingham in 1994 were not very good. He was an outfielder. He played in 127 games. He batted .202, 3 home runs. He did draw, I believe, 51 walks, so he did show some patience, and he stole some bases, obviously showed some speed. Defensively, I guess he was okay in the outfield. But when you look at this in context, Tom, he's 31 years of age. He's never played professional baseball before, so he's behind the 8 ball. Southern League is a very good league. I mean, Double-A, it's a league where a lot of prospects traditionally find themselves. He's going up against younger guys who are more experienced and probably better baseball players at that point. So in context, his numbers, while not impressive, maybe not as bad as we're led to believe.
Well, right. This is why you can't just look at a single line of statistics and really understand the true story there. And you hit the nail on the head with a number of your comments there. The key with this, there's a lot of things you can take away with here, but I think one of them is, yes, it's Double-A baseball. and he's 10 years older than many of the ball players there who have been playing a long time. The last time he played baseball, he never played professional baseball, of course. The last time he played baseball was in high school. So, listen, I played baseball in high school. there's not, I'm sure there's not particularly well, but that's a long time ago, for Jordan in '94, and it's important to remember that batting 200, having not played baseball for well over a dozen years, and at a level when he did play baseball that was nowhere close to low-level minors, it's very impressive, actually. I think that's the takeaway that I get from it is I can't believe he batted 200. But that's even, as I mentioned, if you're just looking at the single-year line, his improvement throughout the year was great. As I mentioned, in the Arizona Fall League, he batted close to 250, and that's a league full of top prospects. So he was doing well there. Additionally, and I think this is the part that really hits home with me, is that when he started off, he was really struggling, but his work ethic was incredible. I guess it shouldn't come as a surprise, but he's dabbling in a sport that wasn't his best sport by far. And his work ethic took him a long way. He made every effort to get better. He took batting practice 4 times a day. And I think that speaks volumes about how Michael Jordan rose to the heights that he did in basketball, let alone a pretty good height in baseball.
I have heard at least one former White Sox executive talk about this improvement that you mentioned, how his bat speed was actually fairly impressive. And in kind of reading between the lines, when I heard this particular gentleman interviewed, a guy who had worked as a scout for the White Sox, I kind of got the sense that he felt if Jordan had stayed with baseball, he might have been able to at least move up to AAA, maybe not made the majors, but might have done much better as a second-year AA player, or perhaps moved up to AAA at some point. I'm trying to remember, Tom, why he didn't come back to baseball the next year. Did he go right back to the Bulls, or did he just take some time off? I don't quite remember the timeline from that period.
Well, the timeline is that there was a baseball strike in Major League Baseball. And there's a couple of things going on. What's often mentioned is he didn't want to cross picket lines potentially if he was asked to play in the majors, because they're bringing up, remember, this is when they were going to have replacement players. There were replacement players in spring training, and there was this possibility that he would be named as a replacement player, and he wouldn't cross the picket line. I think that's true. More importantly, and what's somewhat lost in this story, is that by doing what he did, which was becoming a very inexperienced professional in a sport that he wasn't familiar with particularly well, and working very hard at it, and doing, going around on the team bus with the players and bonding with these guys who are not at the top of their sport. They're trying to get to the top of the sport. It really rekindled a love of sport for him that was dwindling when he decided to leave basketball. And so, yes, he didn't end up playing in Major League Baseball, but you could definitely make the argument that his experience with Birmingham and in the AFL rekindled his love of sport and revived him such that he thought, you know what, I'm going to go back to basketball refreshed.
Yeah. And
obviously it worked out really well. They did another 3 championships. He left after the three-peat. So something worked. And I think it was regaining a love of sport and remembering why it was that he loved what he did.
One final question on Jordan, and I want to make reference to what happened in September. He was at the induction ceremony when one of the other staff members told me that he was there. I thought he was kidding. but he was there. I was completely shocked. I had no idea. Was that your reaction as well? Did you have any notion at all that he might be a guest of, well, it was a guest of Derek Jeter, but he might be a guest of anybody's that day?
Well, when I called him up and asked him to come on out, no, I was surprised too. I didn't know. And, with him was Patrick Ewing was there as well.
Yeah.
And it was pretty, induction ceremonies can be wonderful, what's happening on stage and the speeches, and to see that mass of great Hall of Famers on stage. But sometimes in the audience, there's a lot to see as well. So you never know who's going to show up at Hall of Fame induction, which is part of the fun of coming to the induction ceremony.
Yeah, we do get on occasion non-baseball people. I think of the actor Jim Caviezel. I know that you had dinner with him later Sunday night at the Otis Saga, you and some other Hall of Fame staff members. I think Richard Gere was there one year. There have been other actors, other celebrities. I cannot think of a star, though, from another sport that would be quite at the level of a Michael Jordan. I think that's probably the biggest non-baseball athlete we've ever had in an induction.
Well, it's pretty hard to get a bigger star than Michael Jordan, period. Maybe if Muhammad Ali had come to the induction ceremony, something like that. But yes, it was pretty amazing to see him there. He's very tall as well, Bruce. So he stands out. He's very tall.
Yeah.
And by the way, I should mention, that's another factor here. Here's a guy who's not experienced in baseball, and he's 6'6".
Yeah.
And there's a disadvantage to being a tall baseball player. Not only is your strike zone larger, but just the particular skill of batting doesn't lend itself very well to being tall and lanky. Now, certainly there's lots of great, very tall baseball players in the majors, but I think there's an additional difficulty being posed by great height.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom, because when you think of him as a great NBA player, it's not his height that stands out. I mean, for an NBA player, he was average, 6'5", 6'6". There's guys who are 7 foot. But then you put him on a baseball field, and certainly back in the 1990s, there weren't a lot of guys who were 6'6", the way that Michael Jordan is. So yeah, as a baseball player, the height is something that really does jump out at you. Well, we go from one major multi-sport athlete to another, albeit from a much earlier generation, represented here baseball from the great Jim Thorpe, a man who won gold medals in the decathlon and the pentathlon at the Olympic Games in 1912. Would go on to become a Football Hall of Famer, but also did play 6 major league seasons. And Tom, we have here a baseball not from an actual major league game, but from one of these wintertime tours that I know you've put a lot of research into. Tell us a story about that.
Well, the Giants and the White Sox went on a world tour in the offseason after the 1913 season. And they went to a number of locations sort of as a 25th anniversary of the 1888-1889 world tour that's been talked about a lot. And the White Sox and Giants brought many of the players from their teams. There's actually the different squads were also augmented with some players who weren't with the White Sox and Giants. And Jim Thorpe was one of them because he was playing for John McGraw's New York Giants at the time. He was also going to be a huge draw because he was a big name, having won the pentathlon and decathlon at the 1912 Winter Olympics in Stockholm, Sweden. So he would be a draw as well, and that was important, just to draw fans from countries that are not necessarily familiar with baseball. So that there's an advantage there that Jim Thorpe was on this tour. The artifact that we have used to introduce this story is a baseball that was signed by members of the Giants on that world tour and Jim Thorpe's signature. I'm not sure you can see it right there, but there is a signature just below where it says Giants. It says Jim Thorpe and a lot of other ball players.
It almost looks like it's printed Jim Thorpe rather than a traditional cursive signature. Before we talk about Thorpe's career in a little more depth, Tom, I wanted to ask about this baseball. It's severely discolored. Is that the natural aging process for a baseball from 1914, or has it been treated with some sort of a substance?
It was treated with a form of lacquer. What are we talking about? 107 years ago? Did I get my math right there?
Yeah.
So that was not uncommon for people who wanted to preserve signatures on baseballs to lacquer them, which is actually not a great idea, and it does discolor it to a level often that is problematic. This one you can still see a lot of the signatures, and now it just looks a little strange that it's much browner than a baseball would otherwise be. But if this baseball had not been treated that way, it would probably look pretty much like a baseball today. It's a little bit, it's going to be a little bit more dark, but they're throwing out baseballs after a couple of pitches now, so all the baseballs used in games today look really, really good because they're barely used at all. But no, the coloring there is definitely due to the lacquer-like substance that was put on the ball.
Tom, let's talk about Thorpe as a player. We know he was a great football player, outstanding track and field athlete. How was he as a professional baseball player?
Well, it was really good. I mean, he made the major leagues, and while I don't want to discount the fact that he would be a draw, and so it helped to sign him because that would be good for attendance. But once again, here we have a guy who signed to play with John McGraw's Giants. He eventually played with a couple other clubs as well, but he batted over his career something around 250. He was only 1 year did he play more than 100 games, but still quite impressive. And if he had really stuck with baseball, it seems likely that he would have been a starter. Got to remember that the other thing is that when he made his debut with the Giants in 1913, he was 26, 27 years old, something like that. So he was not a young guy from a baseball standpoint. And his real abilities were in track and field and in football.
Tom, do we know if he got along well with John McGraw?
Actually, I'm not up on that. I'm not up on that, but I'll tell you this. I'm not sure if you noticed this, Bruce, but the Burt Lancaster movie, Jim Thorpe, All-American, was on television last night on Turner Classic Movies. And which I thought was, wow, it's a coincidence. We're going to be talking to Bruce tomorrow about Jim Thorpe, and apparently TCM must have heard about this, and that's why they ran it last night, right? But and in that movie, though, they definitely imply that John McGraw said, I asked you to bunt at this situation, but you hit away. Don't do that ever again. And Jim Thorpe said, well, I'm out of here. Certainly, that's not what really occurred. There's a Hollywood shortcut there to move on from baseball to what they wanted to talk a little bit more about, which was his football abilities. But I am not up on the relationship between McGraw and Thorpe.
Now, Lancaster played Jim Thorpe?
He did.
Wow. Lots
of problems with this movie, especially from the modern look back, it's a problematic movie in a lot of ways. It's also a very interesting movie and a fun one to watch.
It's interesting, Tom. I was looking up Thorpe's record earlier, and I knew he was obviously a great all-around athlete, track, football, baseball. I didn't know that he'd also played semi-pro basketball. He played in kind of an early version of the NBA, which had not yet been created, but it was semi-professional basketball. I mean, the guy was amazing.
He wasn't, he is an example, and we actually have a number of these guys that we talk about in this exhibit Bo Jackson comes to mind, certainly Michael Jordan, that have great ability in multiple sports. And there's certainly an athleticism part to that. I get that. But obviously baseball, for example, is very skill-based, and basketball is as well. Most of these sports have their own particular skill set, where athleticism certainly helps. It's not going to hurt. But there's a skill set to it that often takes a great amount of experience. But we also have to remember these guys who are not just major leaguers, but they're elite major leaguers in whatever sport they're involved in. So they're at the very, very top. It goes beyond athleticism. It goes into work ethic. It goes into consistency. It goes into effort. And so it doesn't surprise me that he did well in these other sports that are very skill-based, because it wasn't just incredible athleticism they displayed. It was also the ability to learn. When I say that, I always think of Bo Jackson, because what you always hear about Beau was you just had to show him something once, and then he got it. He might not get it. He wouldn't get it without showing it to him, but you show it to him. You say, this is the way to do it. He does it, and he's got it. That's not an athleticism thing. That's a brain thing. That's a talent beyond that. And you combine all these things together, and that's you get these incredible individuals who can excel in multiple ways.
Excellent point, Tom. Let's move on to a more contemporary athlete, not as well known historically as a Thorpe or a Jordan, but still very interesting. Here we have some spikes that belong to Eddie Alvarez. He's a utility infielder. He's played 2020 and 2021 with the Miami Marlins. In terms of his other sport, this is a sport that has absolutely no connection to baseball. You know, you can argue that, there's some crossover with some of the other sports we've talked about, but his other sport is short track speed skating. We don't have his skates, but we do have his baseball spikes. This is a really intriguing two-sport story.
It is. So we go from one Olympian who played baseball to another Olympian who played baseball, going from Thorpe to Eddie Alvarez. What I find fascinating about Eddie Alvarez as a two-sport star is his Olympic sport. He's a silver medalist in the 5,000 meter short track speed skating. It was a relay. That sport has very little, as you mentioned, very little crosstalk with baseball. There have been other Olympians who have medaled in sports in the summer and then Winter Olympics. Very few. There's only 6 who've done it to win a medal in a Winter Olympic sport and a Summer Olympic sport. And he is one of those. But most of the others, while that's extremely impressive for anyone, most of the others do have some sort of crosstalk, whether it's a guy who's a skateboarder and then also a snowboarder, or there's certainly, I know, a lot of crosstalk between this. I'm trying to remember some of the other sports, but you've got baseball, which is very, like I said, it's very skill set. The short track speed skating is very cardio and heavy legs, obviously. They don't seem to really inform one another necessarily. So that's really quite impressive what he did. Like I said, just 6 people in the history of the Olympics since the modern Olympics in 1896 have been able to medal in both summer and winter.
You think about a shortstop in baseball, very athletic, quick, nimble. You could see that translating into the NBA, especially as a quick point guard, that sort of a thing. Or if you have a slugging first baseman like a Frank Thomas, you can see that translating to football, to the college game or to the NFL. But yeah, speed skating, baseball, the connection is not really there. Now, he did donate these spikes, so these came directly from Eddie Alvarez himself. He made his debut with the Marlins last year during the pandemic-shortened season, but he also played with them sometime in 2021. He's mostly a utility infielder. He's an older guy for baseball. He's 31 now. So it's not like he's a top prospect. It's not likely that he's going to have a long career. But that's partly because he got started late. I mean, he started as a minor leaguer at the age of 24. And that's almost unheard of.
Right. And you have to remember, he's also very focused on reaching a pinnacle in a different sport, which takes different training and certainly takes a lot of time. And also let's remember that he, so he's done sort of three things here, two of which are very related, but reached a pinnacle with the short track speed skating, then played Major League Baseball, and then played baseball in the Olympics. So it just goes to show you the kind of work ethic that he had, and he would get interested in something, and he talks about this. He gets interested and he just doesn't let go. Well, that's very helpful for making a long way in whatever endeavor you may be interested in participating in.
We should also mention that this brand of spikes that we have displayed here, Air Jordans, so a connection to another one of our two sport athletes. Tom, one of your areas of expertise is the 19th century. So this brings us to one of the most significant figures in 19th century baseball history, Hall of Famer George Wright. This is obviously not a baseball bat, not a shovel. It is a cricket bat. We're not really sure that he actually used it, but it was given to him by another cricket player. George Wright was born in England, if I recall correctly, and did play cricket as a youth, but then made the transition to baseball. Tell us more about the cricket bat we have here.
Right. So real quickly, George Wright was actually born in the U.S., in New York. You're thinking of his brother, Harry.
Harry was born in England.
Harry was born in England and came over. But George and Harry's father, Sam, was a cricketer. And so it's not a surprise that his sons were interested in sports in general, and both particularly were interested in cricket, but they got in as well to this up and coming, very popular sport in America called baseball, and they made the transition to that. But George Wright was a Renaissance man when it came to sports. This bat was given to him by a cricketer from England named Ted Pooley, who was a wicketkeeper. And in 1868, so this is a year before the famed 1869 Red Stockings that Harry and George both were with. In 1868, there was a tour of a professional 11 from England that came over to the States and Canada and played cricket matches for about a month in late 1868. And Ted Pooley was the wicketkeeper for that professional 11 and gave George Wright this bat. As a cricketer himself, as someone who knew the importance of cricket and loved it, this was a star player giving you their bat. That's very cool. So he kept that. It obviously was important to him because this came through his family to us. His son donated it to us, and it's just a stunning artifact that talks about his love of cricket. But he went well beyond baseball and cricket as well. I don't talk about it in the exhibit so much, but he was a very early proponent of golf. He helped create the first, if potentially the second, there's a little dispute about this, but the point is, if it's the second, it's by a month or so. Public golf course in the United States. He was an avid golfer, and his son, Beals Wright, was a great tennis player who actually won the U.S. championship in I think it was 05, and also, by the way, was an Olympic medalist as well. So the family was just chock full of incredible athletes, but George in particular has a special place because he is the only person in the history of cricket and baseball to play at the top flight level of both. So in baseball, we call that Major League Baseball. In cricket, that's called top flight cricket. and he's the only person to have done both. I suppose somebody might do it again in the future, but that would be very surprising. You never know, I guess. But right now, he's the only person ever in those two very popular sports.
As I know you remember, Tom, we had a really good exhibit, a temporary exhibit about cricket a number of years ago. It might have been more than 10. And I do remember going through the exhibit, but honestly don't remember that much about cricket. So refresh me on the cricket bat. Is it the same length generally as a baseball bat, or is it much different?
Well, look, the main thing is, as you can see here, that it's very flattened on one side. One side has got the back side is somewhat curved, like a little convex. The front side is, slightly curved, but it's mostly quite flat, and it's wider, certainly a lot wider than a baseball bat. Listen, it would take many of our Curator spotlights to go into talking about cricket as a sport and trying to explain it, etc. But one basic thing you have to understand at the top level of cricket, for much of the history of the game, it's changing quite a bit over the last 30, 40 years, but much of the history of the game, there's lots of things that are very similar between baseball and cricket, and there's lots of things that are absolutely the complete opposite. And one thing that's very opposite is, in general, the batting styles, or more of batting philosophy. In cricket, batting is much more of a defensive effort, whereas in baseball, it's much more offensive. So you protect your wicket in cricket, and a wider bat's going to help you do that. That doesn't mean that there's not offense involved. There is offense. You're scoring runs when you bat in cricket, hopefully, but it's done in a much more defensive way, especially in what's called test match cricket.
Do the batters in cricket, do they hold their hands similar to where a baseball player, major league player, would hold his bat on a bat? Are they at the very end and together, or do they choke up? How does that work?
It can be moved around a lot, but it depends on what you want to do with the bat. And I love today that you're seeing more and more baseball players that actually move it around a lot. Anthony Rizzo comes to mind. I just love that when it's got two strikes, he's choking up on the bat because he just knows it's going to be a better way to succeed. But you have to remember, in cricket, again, a major difference is there is no foul territory. So wherever the ball goes off the bat, something can happen. An out could happen. You could score a run. You could not score a run. But so the way you attack a ball that's been delivered is in many ways quite different.
Wright is a member of the Baseball Hall of Fame, played 12 seasons in the major leagues. He was a shortstop and batted .301 over the course of his career. His brother Harry also played for that Cincinnati Red Stockings team. And if I recall correctly, Harry was the center fielder and the manager. He was kind of the brains behind the operation, right?
Right, but you can't underplay George Wright's significance in the early development of the game. His ability at shortstop, quite frankly, he would have been the best player basically wherever he played at that time. But he was shortstop, but his ability was off the charts. It was definitely sort of a man amongst the boys kind of a situation.
Wow.
And his innovation, as well as Harry Wright's innovation in terms of managing and strategy, but George's innovation in terms of playing cannot be understated. It cannot be overstated, sorry.
Yeah. We now move to, I guess, our headlining piece, maybe the most famous two-sport star, at least in some ways, the great Beau Jackson. And there's a great story here. We're going to start by telling you that we do have some other artifacts from Beau in his baseball career. We have caps from the 1989 Kansas City Royals regular season. We also have a cap that he wore in the 1989 All-Star game. But in 1991, the Raiders, I guess at the request of the Hall of Fame, they sent an artifact. It turned out to be this jersey. The Raiders didn't provide much information to our registrar at the time, Peter Clark, who's now retired. So we didn't really know much about it beyond the fact that it was used, we think, in 1991. But then later on, you put on your Sherlock Holmes investigative equipment, and you found out a lot more information, the historical significance of this football jersey. So pick up the story, if you would, from there, Tom.
Well, I was actually researching the jersey to better understand it for a different project we were working on, which is called Hall of Fame Connections. It's a video series that you can watch on YouTube that makes interesting connections between, in general, players and managers over time. And it's kind of a fun look at ways to connect people. That not simply something as simple as, well, this guy played with this guy who later played with this guy, but in other interesting ways. And we had to formulate these and come up with ideas of ways to make connections. And I think, well, the Beau Jackson's a really neat character because he can talk about connecting between baseball and a completely different sport, and that might be a fun road to go down. So I looked into what we had, and as you mentioned, we have a cap and a helmet of his, but we also have this jersey, and I wanted to better understand it because we didn't really have much information about it at the time. I was able to do some photo matching with known photographs of Beau Jackson with the Raiders, and was surprised. It's sort of that's an understatement, I guess. I was very much surprised to find out that it wasn't any old Raiders jersey. It was actually a jersey from the game that he played in the postseason in January, or mid-January of '91, where the Raiders played the Cincinnati Bengals in the, on their way hopefully to going to the Super Bowl. They didn't go to the Super Bowl, and that's the game in which Beau Jackson was tackled from behind. And at the time, they didn't realize how severe it was, but it was a severe injury to his hip that ended up costing him his football and ultimately baseball career. He did come back and actually play baseball, which is stunning. Both after the injury, he rehabbed, then later, after getting a brand new hip, he rehabbed and came back and played with an artificial hip, which is insane. So once again, shows you the perseverance of an individual and their great ability. But that's what this jersey is. It's the last jersey that Beau Jackson ever wore as an NFL player.
Now, I'm curious about football jerseys. We know that current day baseball uniforms are polyester or double knit. What about football uniforms? What are they made of?
I'm not very certain, except for this one. This one, it's synthetic material. It's what I'll tell you is neat about this jersey is it's incredibly light, and you can't see it, I don't think, in this picture, but it's got lots of little holes in it that help with it being light. So there, but the funny thing about it is, and that's certainly not the case with baseball, right? Baseball, the jerseys have changed. The materials have changed a lot over time, but they've never gone to this very light and full of holes material. The neat thing about these holes on this particular jersey is that they provide a pattern that when you see how holes match up near other features like the 3 or a patch on the sleeve or whatever, those are, in a sense, unique placements of the holes. And that's one key, not the only key, but one key to being able to compare it with known pictures of him wearing from that mid-January game. That was one way that we could determine, oh yeah, that's exactly the same jersey. There's a number of other things as well. We don't want to just rely on one form of fingerprinting, in a sense. But as it turns out, the makeup of that jersey helped us determine that, in fact, it really was that final jersey he wore. Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers have seen the play. It looked fairly innocuous. I think he was knocked out of bounds. He was hit, in the waist area, in the hip, but it didn't look that bad. And then I guess a couple of days later, we learned this was a major, major injury. He would never again play in the NFL.
Right. If you watch the play without any knowledge of what's going on, you wouldn't think too much of it, although he got up and he went back down on the ground again. But if you watch it knowing what to look for, then it becomes pretty apparent, because the tackle was done on one leg and really pulled on that leg. And Beau is so strong that didn't necessarily need to stop him. So he kept on going, and that actually separated the hip there. And so part of it was he was so strong that may have been a problem, a contributing factor to the injury. But at the time, they were calling it a hip pointer, but he didn't come back in that game, certainly. I mean, that really was the last play he ever made. He didn't come back in the game, but initially they weren't certain he might be able to come back in the playoffs. That went out, and then they thought, well, he'll just be back next season. That just gives it time to rest, and then that didn't happen. So very tragic.
For those of you that get our magazine, Memories and Dreams, there is an in-depth article written by Bill Francis, one of our colleagues here at the Hall of Fame. He's a senior researcher and writing specialist who works up in the Giamatti Center, and he's written all about Beau and the jersey and Tom's discovery in Memories and Dreams. So if you are a member of the Hall of Fame, you get this magazine, make sure you read the article. As Tom mentioned, he underwent a hip replacement, missed most of 91 and all of 1992, somehow returned to baseball in 1993. I believe he's the first and maybe the only player to come back and play with an artificial hip in baseball history. It's not only a tribute to his athleticism, but also to his work ethic and his determination as well. Just a phenomenal athlete, phenomenal story, and better late than never in terms of discovering the full context of what we had in this Beau Jackson LA Raiders jersey. We do have a couple of multi-sport stars that we still want to talk about. Next up is not so much a player, but an umpire, a man named Bill Stewart. We have an umpire's home plate broom that he used. He was also someone who refereed in the National Hockey League. And in fact, at one point, he left that particular job and became a coach of a Stanley Cup champion team, the Chicago Blackhawks, 1937-1938. Now, I know, Tom, we don't have a lot of these umpire brooms in our collection. Tell us about the Bill Stewart broom.
Well, this is a broom that would have been used. It's easy to carry around by a home plate umpire. Even today, home plate umpires carry around very small brooms. They look fairly different than this, but to clean off home plate, you still need to clean off home plate so you can get a good view of the strike zone. They used to actually use brooms, really large brooms that would be laying on the field. And if you keep your eyeball out, start looking at photos a long time ago, you can see even into the 20th century, you can see full-length brooms that are just sort of hanging out there, which seems fairly dangerous in a lot of ways, but those were eventually sort of outlawed, and they said you can just bring a small broom. You don't need something giant to get the job done. So that's what this is. So Bill Stewart used this for much of his career as a home plate umpire in the major leagues.
He had a notable career. He umpired 4 All-Star games, 5 World Series, and then, as I said, moved on to the National Hockey League. I've seen these brooms on TV, but I've never seen one up close and personal. About how high are they? How tall are they?
They're pretty small. I actually, let me see if I've got a size on you. It's about what you're seeing, the height there from the top of the handle to the bottom bristle is about 4 inches.
Okay. Yeah. And it's pretty much made from, I guess, your standard broom material for what you would use in terms of your home broom. So here we have something not so much from an athlete, but an umpire. And obviously that's still qualified in terms of being a 2-sport contributor. Absolutely.
Listen, you have to be at the top of your game if you're going to be a major league umpire. That is not easy to do this. And the fact that he was doing that and a hockey ref is astonishing, I think. One of the things I just love telling people about hockey, and I am a novice at knowing anything about hockey, but I do enjoy watching it. And one of the things for people who are really not into it, I always tell them, forget about stick handling, forget about strategy, forget about goaltending. If you're just new at, just watch these guys skate. Just factor out the actual part about where you're trying to score and defend, and just watch their ability at skating, and that'll blow you away.
Yeah.
And you know what? You can do that with the hockey refs too, who also have to get out of the way all the time. It's really very impressive. But the other thing was, not only was he a hockey ref and an MLB umpire, but in 1937, he quit being a hockey ref to coach the Chicago Blackhawks. And what's really amazing about that was he coached them to the Stanley Cup Finals, the first American-born coach to take a hockey team to win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, that is amazing. To know the rules for those two different sports, as different as they are, and then also to have success as a coach, pretty remarkable. All right, we have one more artifact that is featured in our double play exhibit up on the second floor. And this takes us to a bit of a different sport. We have a golf scorecard belonging to a guy named Sam Bird. Sam Bird won 6 times on the PGA Tour, and he's the only man to play both in a World Series and in the Masters, which he did 5 times. So here we have his scorecard. Now we see his name typewritten, and then we have, well, his signature as well, but also next to his signature is another pretty important signature, Byron Nelson. Why is Byron Nelson there?
Well, he was there. That was a twosome in this. The scorecard is from the 3rd round of the 42 Masters, and he eventually finished 4th in the 42 Masters, but that was his twosome partner there. Wow. So it's really quite amazing. Byron Nelson went on to actually tie for first there, and then there was a playoff. But he and Ben Hogan tied for first after the 4 rounds. But Sam Bird finished 4th in that, for that scorecard. That's a 42 scorecard, and that's ahead of 2 guys that were actual former Masters champions, Horton Smith and Jimmy Demaret. So very impressive. And then I might add, we don't show it, but a scorecard from 1941, but he finished 3rd in 1941, and he actually finished ahead of Ben Hogan in that 41 Masters. So it's not like he's doing pretty well. He was a great golfer. So very impressive. And by the way, an incredibly good baseball player. He played for the Yankees. He played for specifically the 36 Yankees, but he was with, the 34 Yankees. But he's with the Yankees from 29 to 34. And he's playing in a very difficult situation because he's playing in an outfield that is incredible during that time. So you've got, guys like Babe Ruth and Ben Chapman, and specifically with the 32 Yankees, which you could argue is one of the greatest teams of all time. The outfield included Chapman, Ruth, and Earl Combs. So he's the 4th outfielder, and it's a tough it's a tough deal because practically any other team he would have been a starting outfielder.
Yeah.
And a great batter. I mean, he batted close to 300 all the time.
I guess somewhat understandable. We could see the success here. I've heard a lot of baseball players say that the baseball swing has similarities to the swing in golf. Obviously not exactly the same, but there are some parallel points. And one thing that I just noticed, Bird had a couple of 6s on this day. He had a 6 on the first hole, which was a par 4, and he had a 6 on the 15th hole, which is a par 5. But other than that, did extremely well that day. So they're the golf scorecard for Sam Bird, outfielder and PGA standout, Masters veteran, played in 5 Masters during the course of his career. We have just a few minutes remaining with our senior curator, Tom Sheber. We do want to take some questions and comments from the audience. First up is a comment, Tom. Somebody wanted to bring up another athlete, a two-sport athlete. I've not heard of him, but maybe you have. Jim writes, programs on this often overlook Hinkie Haynes, the only athlete to play on a World Series champion and also play on an NFL champion. He was a reserve outfielder with the 23 Yankees. And then in 1927, he helped the New York Football Giants to the NFL championship in 1927. I would point out to Jim and anyone else that the athletes that we did pick, or that Tom picked and the curators picked for this, based on who we had artifacts for, and I imagine we don't have any artifacts for Hinkie Haynes. I have to admit, I've never heard of Hinkie Haynes before today. Have you, Tom?
I had, but I hadn't heard it before I started doing work on this exhibit.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the things we want to make sure we could do was have an artifact related to each individual. So that was one thought. And I should mention that the Sam Bird scorecard is a replica of the original that is with a museum in the Augusta Museum with the, down where the Masters is played. So the other thing we wanted to make sure we did is we didn't want to repeat a sport specifically. Mm-hmm. So there's a number of guys who've played Major League Baseball and football. An obvious one is Deion Sanders is another one that people think about. And certainly Hinkie Haynes would be another possibility. What we weren't doing was saying these are the top guys in each one, or these are our favorites or anything. We wanted to make sure we were showing how there have been people who have played multiple different sports and baseball at a very high level. So that's not it. Believe me, there's only 7 individuals talked about in this exhibit, but we know there's way more that have managed to do 2 sports at an elite level. The idea was not to give a top list. We just wanted to show some very neat artifacts and tell briefly they're very cool stories. So, I always think when it comes to basketball and baseball, I think of Danny Ainge. That's the first guy actually that pops into my head because I grew up in the 70s. So, and he was an incredible baseball player and obviously great basketball player. But we have one small case in which to tell the story, so we need to sort of cut to the chase. And so we did that.
Well, it certainly makes sense. Question coming in from Connor. Tom, he wants to know, who is your favorite 2-sport athlete and why?
I don't think I have a favorite 2-sport athlete, as it turns out. I got to say, for this exhibit, I really did like the story of Bill Stewart, because he's, I think, a big surprise for a lot of people. I don't think that Bo Jackson's going to be as surprising. I think that the fact that we have this jersey is pretty surprising. And I don't think that Michael Jordan is particularly surprising. So it's kind of fun when you can present the story of someone where someone might not know as much about that. And so I really enjoyed the story about Bill Stewart taking a team to win the Stanley Cup. And the team wasn't particularly great either, by the way. They finished under 500 during the regular season, and but they got hot in the Stanley Cup playoffs there, and various other wacky things happened. I encourage people to read about the 37-38 Blackhawks. It's a pretty wild story. But and also Sam Bird, I think, is a really cool story. Also a little bit less well known.
Final question for Tom Sheber. Tom, do we know how long this exhibit will be up on the second floor?
We don't know how long it's going to be up on the second floor, but I can guarantee it's going to be at least a year, probably longer than that. But at this time, we have not nailed that down. We're actually working to figure the schedule out in the coming weeks. But for now, come on out anytime this year and certainly next year to check it out. You'll enjoy it.
The exhibit is called Double Play, 2 Sports Stars. You can see the case located at the far end of the Whole New Ballgame exhibit, and it is on the second floor of the Hall of Fame and Museum. As always, our thanks go out to Tom Sheber for contributing to our virtual curator spotlight. And of course, our thanks to the Ford Motor Company for their generous support of these and all of our other virtual programs. Tom, as always, a lot of fun talking to you. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Bruce. Take care.
All right, Senior Curator Tom Sheber joining us for the virtual Curator Spotlight. Our next program coming up in just a couple of days, Thursday, November the 4th. We will do the virtual author series with Steve Tretter, talking about his new biography of legendary New York and San Francisco Giants owner Horace Stoneham. Thanks, everybody, for being with us today, and have a great day. Take care.